Summer, 946 AD. The land of the Drevlians. The air above the tract trembles with heat. The ancient city of Iskorosten, the capital of the rebellious tribe, has been transformed into a gigantic funeral pyre. The crackle of collapsing walls and the screams of people trapped within a ring of fire merge into a single, terrifying roar. On a hill, at a safe distance from the inferno, stands a woman. She does not avert her gaze from the conflagration. She holds no sword, and she wears no armor. On her palm, a carrier pigeon sits calmly. History and the Church will remember her as saint equal to the apostles, the woman who brought the light of faith to the dark lands of the north. But in this moment, we are not looking at a Christian righteous woman. Here acts a ruthless pagan avenger who has just turned birds into living torches to incinerate an enemy that steel could not reach. In the previous episode, Prince Igor was torn in two. His demise in the Drevlian forests placed Rus on the brink of extinction. The death of the ruler decapitated a country that was held together solely by male force and fear. The heir to the throne was only 3 years old. The Varangian elite was ready to begin a vicious dogfight for power, while neighbors were already carving up the Rurikid lands. It seemed the finale was foregone, but the enemies forgot about the widow. Today, a psychological thriller about transformation will unfold. We will investigate how a woman, left alone in a ring of wolves, achieved the impossible. You will learn why a marriage proposal in those times could end in a live burial, and how a bathhouse was turned into a crematorium for a diplomatic elite. We will walk the path from a bloody pit near Kiev to the Golden Throne in Constantinople. You will understand how Olga outplayed the Byzantine emperor himself in an intellectual duel, forcing him to become her godfather, and thereby stripping him of the possibility to claim her hand and her lands. This story is not about miracles. It is a chronicle of how, out of chaos of personal tragedy and bestial cruelty, cold, impartial law is born. Olga was the first to realize a truth inaccessible to Rurik, to Oleg the prophet, or to her fallen husband. An empire is held together not by the sharpness of the retinue's swords, but by the inevitability of taxes. The Iron Lady of the Middle Ages, the mother of state order, the first Christian on the throne of pagans. We begin our immersion into an era when revenge became the foundation of statehood. Kiev, late autumn of 945 AD. The news of Igor's death swept through the city in icy silence. The demise of a ruler usually entails a boisterous funeral feast and an immediate scramble for power. But here, the situation is different. The capital is paralyzed. In the primary chronicle, this moment is hidden behind dry lines, but let us attempt to recreate the atmosphere of that day. It was not heroes laden with loot who returned to the city, but the pathetic remnants of the minor Druzhina. These warriors had seen with their own eyes how their leader was torn apart by birch trees. The state found itself decapitated. We are facing a classic power vacuum. Svyatoslav, the heir to the throne, is only 3 years old. The child is not yet capable of holding a sword or speaking at the thing. Legally, rights belong to a regent, but who would dare to take this place? In the shadow of the throne looms the figure of the voivode Sveneld, the very man whose wealth sparked Igor's envy and pushed the prince into his fatal campaign. Sveneld commands a select, well-fed and perfectly armed army. His strength is enough to simply step over the widow and the child. Olga finds herself in a deadly trap where any decision brings catastrophe closer. Here is a widow in a world where the right to vote is measured by the length of a blade. Any hysteria or tear would be a signal for the Varangian elite to attack. The line of Rurik has weakened. It is time to change the alpha. Olga's face freezes into a mask of icy calm. No one will see her tears in public. Grief turns into armor, and in this moment of critical weakness, a strike comes from the outside. A longship docks the Kiev riverbank. 20 men in rich garments step on the land. These are not invaders or assassins. Before the widow stand matchmakers. The Drevlian prince Mal is making a calculated political move. Let's look at the logic of this offer. Mal is not a forest bandit, but a pragmatic player. He eliminated the wolf, and now, by the right of the strong, claims his pack and his woman. Marriage, for him, is the legitimization of a coup. He does not plan to destroy Kiev. He intends to move the capital to Iskorosten. The ambassadors convey words that sound like mockery. "We killed your husband, for he was like a wolf, plundering and robbing. But our princes are good. Marry our Prince Mal." The situation seems hopeless. Refusal means war, which a ruined Kiev will likely lose to the well-fed Drevlians. Consent means the death of the Rurikid dynasty. Svyatoslav would likely be accidentally eliminated, and Rus would turn into a Drevlian province. But the ambassadors made a fatal error. They saw in Olga a woman craving protection, but she looked at them as a priestess of death. The princess's reply sounds with frightening softness. "Your speech is pleasing to me. I cannot resurrect my husband, but I wish to pay you honor tomorrow before my people." In the word honor, here is the key to the trap. Olga proposes a peculiar ritual to the guests. The next morning, they must demand to be carried in their boat by hand, right into the courtyard of the palace. To the Drevlians, this sounds like a great honor. They will be carried like triumphant conquerors. Guests do not know Scandinavian customs, but in the tradition of the Vikings, a boat that is moved over land by hand has only one purpose. It is a funeral transport. Such honors are merely a screen. Olga is organizing their funeral, and the Drevlians themselves voluntarily agree to play the role of the deceased. Morning comes. 20 of the best men of the Drevlian land sit in the boat, swelling with pride. The Kievans lift the heavy vessel and carry it into the princely courtyard. Meanwhile, behind the walls of the palace, work is in full swing. During the night, servants dug a huge beep pit. The procession enters the courtyard. The ambassadors are carried to the edge and thrown down along with the vessel. Pride on their faces is replaced by animal terror. The men lie at the bottom, broken in a cramped wooden box that has become their coffin. Olga appears at the edge of the pit. She looks down into the eyes of the murderers of her child's father. There is no anger in her voice, but only the cold curiosity of a researcher. The Chronicle preserved her question that became an epitaph for the old era. "Is the honor to your liking?" They scream from the bottom, "It is worse than Igor's death." At that moment, the princess gives a sign. The earth collapses down. This is not just an execution, but a living burial. The ritual is designed to show the Drevlians, her own retinue, and the voivode Sveneld. This woman is capable of cruelty that men never dreamed of. The first batch of the enemy elite is destroyed. 20 of the best administrators and commanders of the Drevlian land are buried in the center of Kiev. But Olga realizes this is only the beginning. In Iskorosten, they do not know the fate of the ambassadors. Before the news spreads, she must strike a second blow. She writes a letter to Prince Mal, a message that will force him to send the remnants of his aristocracy to their death. The princess asks to send even better men to go with great honor to the marriage. The trap has snapped shut, but the beast is still alive. The ambassadors are dead. The earth over them is leveled. The secret is securely hidden in the Kiev courtyard. Olga buys time, but her position remains shaky. She has decapitated the enemy's diplomacy, but his army is intact. Iskorosten is full of warriors, confident in their victory. She needs more than just the murder of ambassadors. It is necessary to destroy the very structure of the tribe's governance. And the princess prepares a meeting for the next delegation, linked to a different element. If the first were swallowed by the earth, the second will be cleansed by fire. Prince Mal, blinded by ambition, reads the letter and orders the gathering of the nation's flower. He believes he is sending them to a wedding. In reality, he is sending them to a crematorium. Kiev, winter of 945 to 946 AD. Olga's plan worked flawlessly. The Drevlians, unaware of the demise of the first delegation, send the best men to the capital. The nobility arrives in Kiev, princes, elders, boyars, the people who held power over the entire land and made key decisions. Olga meets them not as the murderers of her husband, but as honored guests. She suggests that the arrivals, fresh from the road, immediately heat up the bathhouse. For a person of the 10th century, such an invitation sounds maximally hospitable. However, in the pagan worldview, the bathhouse served not just as a place for washing, but as a sacred portal, a place where the spirit is cleansed before transitioning to another state. The princess is preparing a rite of purification for them, not with water, but with flame. The guests disappear inside. The doors are locked from the outside. The chronicler Nestor dispassionately states this moment, and Olga commanded the bathhouse to be set on fire from the doors. Imagine this horror. Leaders of a people accustomed to commanding find themselves trapped in a blazing wooden cage. Fire licks the walls, and screams drown in the furious crackle of logs. This reprisal is not an ordinary execution, but a ritual sacrifice. If the first ambassadors were swallowed by the earth, the second were incinerated by the element of fire. Olga methodically guides her enemies through all trials, like a high priestess performing a bloody rite. The flower of the Drevlian warrior caste is destroyed. The Drevlian land is effectively decapitated. They no longer have strategists or diplomats capable of negotiating. But Olga does not stop. She understands, as long as the enemy's army is in formation, her son remains in danger. She needs to lure the adversary out from under the protection of the fortress walls. A messenger flies to the Drevlians with a third message. There is not a shadow of a threat in it, only the feigned humility of a widow. Behold, I am already coming to you. Brew much mead near the city where you killed my husband, so that I may weep over his grave and hold a funeral feast. A flawless mycological maneuver. The princess strikes at the very heart of pagan ethics. To deny a widow the right to a funeral feast, a trizna, is to violate the law of ancestors. Intoxicated by their own impunity, the Drevlians believe that the ambassadors in Kiev have already agreed on the wedding. They see this as their final victory. The Rus will come to their land not with a sword, but with weeping. Olga arrives at Iskorosten with a handful of servants. The Drevlians come out to meet her and ask, "And where are our ambassadors?" And the widow, looking them in the eye, utters a lie that will go down in history. "They are following me with my husband's retinue." The memorial feast, the Trizna, begins. On Igor's burial mound, wine and mead flow like a river. The Drevlians drink, celebrating the end of the war. Olga herself and her warriors do not touch the alcohol. They wait. They wait until the sun disappears and the minds of the enemies are finally clouded. The princess personally walks the rows of guests, leaning over each one and generously filling their goblets. She waits patiently until the formidable fighters turn into a defenseless, drunken herd. And when the last gaze is fogged with hops, the signal follows. The chronicler reads, "And she commanded her youths to cut them down." A merciless slaughter erupted. According to chroniclers, 5,000 warriors and elders who had come out of the city without armor were slaughtered like cattle. The soil around the burial mound was soaked with the blood of Igor's murderers. Olga performed a funeral feast about which legends would be composed. She did not just take revenge, she destroyed the enemy's manpower without losing a single of her own soldiers. Now the masks are dropped. Diplomacy and rituals are left in the past. The time of open war arrives. The princess gathers a full army. She takes little Svyatoslav with her. This is his first campaign, a lesson in how an empire is forged by sword and will. Ahead lies Iskorosten, a city that does not yet know that it is already dead. 3 strikes have been dealt. Earth, fire, and iron have gathered their harvest. The Drevlian elite is extirpated, their army slaughtered at the feast, but the walls of Iskorosten are still high, and the garrison inside is ready to fight with the desperation of the doomed. Olga understands a storm will cost dearly. She needs a final chord that will forever burn out the very desire to rebel, and she prepares a weapon unknown to the military science of that time, a weapon created from air and sparks. Summer 946 AD. The walls of Iskorosten. The siege has dragged on for a whole year. The Drevlians have locked themselves inside, realizing there will be no mercy. Olga's army tramples in place. Brute force, the traditionally male method of war, has reached a dead end. Storming a wooden fortress on a high rampart would turn into a bloodbath, and time was inexorably slipping away. The princess changes tactics and puts the mask back on. Ambassadors with surprisingly soft speeches head toward the besieged. "Your neighbors have already submitted and are paying tribute regularly," they convey Olga's words. "Would you really prefer death by starvation?" The Drevlians are ready to pay, but fear of vengeance paralyzes their will. And then a phrase is spoken that entered the textbooks of military cunning. "I have already taken revenge for my husband. I need neither honey nor furs. Send a small tribute, 3 pigeons and 3 sparrows from each household." Inside the walls there is jubilation. The enemies laugh at the stupid woman who traded victory for birds. In this gesture, they see weakness or a female whim. It seems to the defenders that they have outwitted fate itself. They catch the feathered creatures and joyfully send them to the Kievan camp. Evening falls. Olga distributes a bird to each warrior. To the bird's legs, they tie tinder wrapped in small scraps of cloth. As soon as dusk thickens, a brief order sounds. Release them! Thousands of wings simultaneously soar into the sky. Obeying instinct, the creatures fly home, under the roofs, into the dovecotes, into the haylofts of Iskorosten. A moment later, and the city flares up. Fire engulfs structures everywhere. Barns and sheds burn. Flame falls directly from the heavens, depriving people of a chance for salvation. Panic erupts. Residents rush out of the fortress, running straight onto the swords of the Kievan retinue. Let us stop this firestorm for a moment. Before us is one of the most spectacular and macabre scenes of ancient history. But if we put aside the chronicle and look at this through the eyes of a biologist, a question arises. Could such a plan work in reality? Or are we dealing with the greatest literary mystification of the Middle Ages? Modern physics and ornithology deliver a harsh verdict. It is impossible. Firstly, biology fails. A bird with a burning fuse attached to its leg will not rush home. A creature seized by panic from the smell of smoke and heat will begin to dart chaotically. It will either crash to the ground after a couple of meters or try to shake off the flame in the air. Forcing 1,000 sparrows to fly synchronously to specific points is a task beyond even modern animal trainers. Secondly, aerodynamics interferes. A sparrow weighs about 30 grams. Smoldering tinder capable of setting a roof on fire, with the binding, turns into a load that will deprive the small creature of the ability to gain altitude. Does this mean the chronicler lied? Not exactly. We are facing a classic wandering plot. Olga, or Helga, belonged to the Scandinavian cultural code. For the world of the Vikings, this story is a typical topos, a template of heroic epic. A similar trick is attributed to the Danish king Hading. Later, this trick would be repeated by Harald Hardrada when taking a Sicilian city. Storytellers inserted this plot into the biographies of heroes, not as a chronicle, but as a marker of genius. For a person of the 10th, 11th centuries, truth lay not in the physics of the process, but in correspondence to the scale of the personality. The chronicler Nestor compiled the primary chronicle a century and a half later and hardly possessed the details of the siege. However, he understood the main thing. Olga surpassed her contemporaries in wisdom. He endowed her with the weapon of the gods, emphasizing the princess won not by brute force, but by the subtle calculation of a strategist. So, what actually happened? Archaeology confirms Iskorosten indeed perished in a colossal fire in the mid-10th century. A layer of ash covers the entire settlement. But the true cause was likely a classic blockade. A year of grueling siege exhausted the defenders. Perhaps the tribute of birds existed as a real demand, but with the goal of depriving the city of food. In hungry times, even pigeons are eaten. Weakened, the fortress opened its gates or fell under the onslaught. However, the ballistics of a sparrow are secondary. The symbol is what matters. Firebirds are a metaphor. Olga didn't just burn the enemy's capital, she closed the mystical cycle of elements. Earth, the buried ambassadors. Fire, the bathhouse. Iron, the massacre. And finally, air. She crushed the old order with all the forces of nature. And now, standing on the ashes, the princess realizes the time of destruction has passed. The era of creation begins. She analyzes her husband's death. Igor fell not from weakness, but from the depravity of the system itself. Polyugie, the annual circuit of lands, resembled legalized robbery. No one knew the exact volume of tribute. This arbitrariness provoked the Drevlian revolt. If everything is left as is, the flame of the next uprising will consume her son. Olga does what neither Rurik nor Oleg the prophet dared. She abolishes chaos. The princess sets off on a massive tour of her domains along the rivers Mesta and Luga, all the way to Novgorod. But now the goal of the trip is not plunder, but measurement. She introduces two revolutionary concepts, uroki and pogosts. An urok fixes the size of the tax. Now every community member knows exactly his debt to the prince is defined and unchangeable. This is the first social contract. This is predictability. The pogost becomes an administrative center. Authority no longer needs to scour the forests. People bring tribute to designated points themselves. Yesterday's field commander turns into an effective administrator and creates a financial vertical. Pogosts turn into the first cells of the state. There, tians, officials, sit, administer justice, and collect funds. Olga marks the territory with banners, signs of Kiev's ownership. She catches the beast in her hunting grounds, but this is no longer a hunt, but a demonstration of law. Her sleds were kept in Pskov for centuries as a museum exhibit, reminding everyone Russian statehood began with the will of this woman. Order reigns within the country. Taxes flow into the treasury. Rebellions subside. Rus outgrows the stage of a loose union of tribes. But Olga looks beyond the horizon. For the great empires, her land still remains a barbarian periphery. For her son to rule as equals with monarchs, discipline is not enough. Status is needed. The princess turns her gaze south to the golden domes of Constantinople. She needs the god of the empire to affirm her own power. Preparations begin for a visit that will become the most sophisticated diplomatic duel of the decade. Autumn, 957 AD. Constantinople. A flotilla approaches the shores of the Golden Horn. This time, there are no warriors with torches on the decks, and the horizon is not obscured by the smoke of fires. Olga has learned the lesson of her husband. Where Igor unsuccessfully tried to break down the door with a battering ram, she decided to find the key. The princess arrives in Tsargrad not as a conqueror, but as an honored guest. There is enough gold in the treasury after her reforms. The ruler craves something else. She seeks international recognition. For the Romaioi, subjects of the world's greatest empire, Rus remained a barbarian northern Scythia. According to the Treaty of 944, which Igor signed after his defeat, Russian merchants did not even dare to enter the city with weapons. They were kept in the suburbs, counted by the head, and allowed into the bathhouses strictly according to schedule. The princess was not satisfied with this state of affairs. She came not for handouts, but for a place in the family of European monarchs. However, Constantine Porphyrogenitus, a refined intellectual and author of the Treatise on Ceremonies, prepared a sophisticated test for the guest. He planned to crush the barbarian woman with luxury and bureaucracy. The ruler of a vast power waits weeks for an audience. She is kept on a ship in the Sud harbor, forced to languish in uncertainty. This is what classic diplomatic pressure looks like. Byzantium points the guest to her place. You may be considered great in your forests, but here you are merely a petitioner at the foot of the throne. Any male chieftain in her place, be it Svyatoslav or Igor, would have already lost his temper and turned the ships around. Olga, however, demonstrates the composure of an experienced player. The princess waits and studies her opponent. Finally, the palace doors swing open. The emperor sits on the throne of Solomon. Around him, mechanical lions roar, golden birds sing, and the seat itself rises toward the ceiling. Everything here is designed to crush the guest with grandeur. But Olga passes through this spectacle with a dignity that astounds the Greeks. She does not fall prostrate like a slave, but merely bows her head slightly. An intellectual duel begins. The Chronicle has preserved a beautiful legend. Supposedly, Constantine, struck by her intelligence, offered her his hand and heart. "I wish to take you as my wife." Historians are skeptical. Porphyrogenitus was in his 6th decade. He was married, and Olga was well past 60. But behind this screen hides a harsh political metaphor. Constantinople strove to turn Rus into its vassal. Silence hangs in the hall. Constantine awaits a humble request, but hears something entirely different. "It is a pagan. If you wish, baptize me yourself." Porphyrogenitus walks into this trap with his eyes open. He sees his victory in this. The ruler of the barbarians accepts the faith from his hands. He becomes her godfather. The patriarch performs the rite. Olga receives the name Helena in honor of the mother of Constantine the Great. And then, when the sacrament is complete, the Basileus again brings up the subject of an alliance. At this moment, Olga snaps the trap shut. She utters a phrase that became classic of diplomacy. "How can you take me as your wife if you yourself baptized me and called me daughter? By Christian law, this is a sin." "You have outwitted me, Olga." The emperor admits defeat. Even if this dialogue is a fiction, it perfectly conveys the essence. Olga got what she wanted. She entered the circle of civilized nations and gained a new status as the spiritual daughter of the monarch without becoming his vassal. Spiritual kinship in the Middle Ages placed rulers on the same step. She left Tsargrad as an equal. The finale of this game played out back in Kiev. Soon, Byzantine ambassadors arrive to see Olga. They demand the promised gifts and military aid. In essence, they are reminding her tribute. The princess, under the protection of her native walls, gives an answer that puts a period to the dispute. She does not refuse directly, but says, "If you stand as long for me in the Pochina harbor as I stood for you in the Sud, then I will give to you." Checkmate. She reminded the emperor of every minute of humiliating waiting. Olga made it clear, Rus accepted the faith, but not subjection. We are partners, not slaves. This was a conscious civilizational choice. Christianity became for her a pass to the major league of world politics. She returned home a different person. But in Kiev, the disappointment awaited her that proved more terrible than Byzantine intrigues.
Kiev, the 960s. Olga returns from Tsargrad a victor. The princess outplayed the emperor, accepted baptism, and secured a new political status. However, in her native Terem, she is met by a wall that cannot be overcome by cunning or age-old wisdom. This obstacle is named Svyatoslav. Behind the dry lines about the succession of power lies a deep human drama. In the princely chambers, a confrontation unfolds between two incompatible worlds. Olga personifies the state. The princess thinks in categories of laws, diplomacy, and stone construction. She notices how the Western world chooses Christ and realizes pagan Rus risks ending up in total isolation. Svyatoslav embodies war itself. The chronicler will call him Pardus, a swift cheetah. His entire life is focused in the saddle, the tent, and the glint of the sword.
The prince despises Christianity as the religion of the Greeks, whose weakness and effeminacy he cannot accept. The mother tries to get through to her son. Olga urges him to be baptized, appealing not only to the salvation of the soul, but also to political advantage. Svyatoslav replies with a phrase that sounds like a death sentence to all maternal diplomacy. "How can I alone accept a different faith? My retinue will begin to laugh." Astonishing, the great warrior, the future crusher of Khazaria, fears not death in battle, but the mockery of his own fighters. The son depends entirely on the opinion of his entourage. Svyatoslav acts not as an autocrat, but as first among equals in a warrior corporation, and this community remains strictly pagan. For a Druzhina member, Christ, preaching humility, looks absurd. The gods of war, Perun and Thor, demand blood, not prayerful ecstasy. Olga understands. She has lost her son. He no longer belongs to the family or even the native land. He has given himself to the element of battle. Realizing that the Byzantine path is blocked, Olga decides on a desperate maneuver. In 959, she sends ambassadors to the German king Otto I. Western Chronicles preserved a record of messengers from Helena, queen of the Rugi, asking to send a bishop. Thus, Olga strove to define the country's fate for centuries ahead. If Byzantium is too arrogant and her son is stubborn, the princess is ready to seek allies in Rome. But the mission turns into a failure. Bishop Adalbert barely escapes from Kiev with his life. Svyatoslav's pagan party gains the upper hand. The retinue members do not wish to tolerate either Greek or Latin preachers in the city. Olga is forced to retreat. She withdraws into the shadows, dedicating herself to raising her grandsons, while Svyatoslav seeks glory in endless campaigns. And while the prince pursues the phantom of a nomadic empire, Rus itself finds itself on the edge of the abyss. 968 AD. Svyatoslav is fighting on the Danube. The prince dreams of moving the capital to Pereyaslavats, claiming, "There is the center of my land." But while he builds castles in the air in a foreign land, his real home is engulfed in flames. The Pechenegs. Taking advantage of the ruler's absence, the nomads surround Kiev in a tight ring. Let us transport ourselves inside the besieged fortress. Heat, crowding, thirst. On the walls stands the old Princess Olga. 3 frightened boys press against her, her grandsons, Yaropolk, Oleg, and the youngest, Vladimir. They gaze into the countless campfires of the enemies. There is nowhere to expect salvation from. Svyatoslav is too far away. Olga sends a messenger with a desperate appeal. Only the cunning of the voivode Pretich, who created the illusion of approaching reinforcements, saved the city from storming until the return of the retinue. When Svyatoslav finally galloped into Kiev, dusty, tired but proud of his Danubian triumphs, he was met not by fanfares. Before him stood his mother, and her reproach wounded more painfully than any Khazar blade. "You, prince, seek foreign lands and care for them, but you have abandoned your own. The Pechenegs nearly took us, and your mother, and your children." The moment of truth, a clash of 2 polar ideologies. For Olga, the state is land, people, and the inviolability of borders. For Svyatoslav, it is merely the place where he happens to be, his retinue and rich loot. The mother blames the son for turning into a wandering warmonger who betrayed the duty of a ruler. Svyatoslav is silent. he has nothing to object. This conversation became their last. Strength is leaving the Iron Princess. She realizes her son can no longer be changed. However, a last hope glows in her heart. 3 boys who stood with her on the walls under the hail of enemy arrows, the grandsons. They absorbed her quiet prayers and saw how the pagan fury of their father nearly destroyed them, while the wisdom of their grandmother tore the city from the claws of death. The youngest listened most attentively, Vladimir. It was he who remembered this lesson best of all, to complete the work of his great-grandmother years later. Olga is dying. Before her death, she performs a quiet feat. She forbids the pagan trizna. No bonfires, no ritual killings, no intoxicating mead, only a priest and a quiet prayer. Her funeral in 969 becomes the first public Christian act of the dynasty. The earth accepted her body, undefiled by fire. Svyatoslav buried his mother and immediately galloped off to war, toward his own demise. He never grasped Olga's lesson. An empire built only on the sword will crumble as soon as the warrior's hand weakens. The era of wisdom has passed. The time of fury is arriving. The prince remains alone with history and an enemy that cannot be hacked down with an axe. Svyatoslav went down in history as the last Viking on the Kievan throne. He crushed the Khazar Khaganate and dared to challenge mighty Byzantium. In the next episode, we will see his triumph and tragedy. You will learn how a legendary warrior turned an enemy's skull into a wine cup, and why dreams of a Danubian empire narrowed down to a single golden earring in the ear of a fallen prince. Subscribe so you don't miss the finale of this saga.